Then the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, When a man has a swelling on the skin of his body, a scab or a bright spot, and it becomes the infection of leprosy on the skin of his body, then he shall be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons the priests. The priest shall look at the diseased spot on the skin of his body, and if the hair in the infection has turned white, and the infection appears deeper than the skin of his body, it is an infection of leprosy. When the priest has looked at him, he shall pronounce him ceremonially unclean. If the bright spot is white on the skin of his body, and does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and the hair on it has not turned white, the priest shall isolate the person who has the infection for 7 days. The priest shall examine it on the 7th day, and if in his estimation the infection has not changed and has not spread on the skin, then the priest shall isolate him for 7 more days. The priest shall examine him again on the 7th day, and if the infection has a more normal colour, and the spot has not spread on the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only a scab, and he shall wash his clothes, and be clean. But if the scab spreads farther on the skin, after he has shown himself to the priest, for his ceremonial cleansing, he shall show himself to the priest again. The priest shall look, and if the scab has spread on the skin, then he shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy. When a leprous infection is on a person, he shall be brought to the priest. The priest shall examine him, and if there is a white swelling on the skin, and it has turned the hair white, and there is new raw flesh in the swelling, it is a chronic leprosy on the skin of his body, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. He shall not isolate him, because he is clearly unclean. But if the suspected leprosy breaks out farther on the skin, and it covers all of the skin of the one who has the outbreak, from his head to his foot, wherever the priest looks, the priest shall examine him. If the suspected leprosy has covered his entire body, he shall pronounce him clean of the disease. It has all turned white, and he is clean. But whenever raw flesh appears on him, he shall be unclean. The priest shall examine the raw flesh, and he shall pronounce him unclean. The raw flesh is unclean. It is leprosy. But if the raw flesh turns again, and is changed to white, then he shall come to the priest. And the priest shall examine him, and if the diseased part is changed to white, then the priest shall pronounce him who had the disease to be clean. He is clean. And when there is on the skin of the body the scar of a boil that is healed, and in the place of the boil there is a white swelling or a bright spot, reddish white, then it shall be shown to the priest. And the priest shall look, and if it looks deeper than the skin, and the hair on it has turned white, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is the disease of leprosy. It has broken out in the boil. But if the priest examines it, and finds no white hair in it, and it is not deeper than the skin, and is dull in colour, then the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. If it spreads farther on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a disease. But if the bright spot remains where it is, and does not spread, it is the scar of the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. Or if the body has on its skin a burn from fire, and the new flesh of the burn becomes a bright spot, reddish white or white, then the priest shall examine it, and if the hair in the bright spot has turned white, and it appears deeper than the skin, then leprosy has broken out in the burn. So the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is the disease of leprosy. But if the priest examines it, and there is no white hair in the bright spot, and it is not deeper than the rest of the skin, but is dull in colour, then the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. And the priest shall examine him on the 7th day. If it is spreading farther on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy. But if the bright spot remains in its place, and has not spread in the skin, but is dull in colour, it is a swelling from the burn, and the priest shall pronounce him clean, for it is the scar of the burn. When a man or woman has a disease on the head, or in the beard, face, the priest shall examine the diseased place. If it appears to be deeper than the skin, with yellow, thin hair in it, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a scale. It is leprosy of the head or beard. But if the priest examines the spot infected by the scale, and it does not appear deeper than the skin, and there is no black hair in it, the priest shall isolate the person with the scaly infection for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall examine the diseased spot. If the scale has not spread, and has no yellow hair in it, and the scale does not look deeper than the skin, then he shall shave himself, but he shall not shave the scale. And the priest shall isolate the person with the scale for 7 more days. Then on the 7th day, the priest shall look at the scale. If the scale has not spread on the skin, and appears to be no deeper than the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. He shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scale spreads farther on the skin after his cleansing, then the priest shall examine him. And if the scale has spread on the skin, The priest need not look for the yellowish hair. He is unclean. If, in the priest's estimation, the scale has remained without spreading, and black hair has grown in it, the scale is healed, he is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. When a man or a woman has bright spots on the skin of the body, even white bright spots, then the priest shall look, and if the bright spots on the skin of their bodies is a dull white, it is only a rash that has broken out on the skin. He is clean. If a man loses the hair on his head, he is bald, but he is clean. And if he loses the hair on front of his head, he is bald on the forehead, but he is clean. But if there is a reddish-white infection on the bald head or forehead, it is leprosy breaking out on his bald head or forehead. Then the priest shall examine him, and if the diseased swelling is reddish-white on his bald head or forehead, like the appearance of leprosy on the skin of the body, he is a leprous man, he is unclean. The priest shall most certainly pronounce him unclean. His disease is on his head. As for the leper who has the infection, his clothes shall be torn, and the hair of his head shall be uncovered, dishevelled, and he shall cover his moustache, and call out, "Unclean! Unclean!" He shall remain ceremonially unclean. As long as the disease is on him, he is unclean. He shall live alone. He shall live outside the camp. When a garment has a mark of leprosy in it, whether it is a wool garment or a linen garment, whether in woven or knitted material, or in the warp, lengthwise strands, or woof, crosswise strands, of linen or of wool, or in a skin, or on anything made of leather. If the mark is greenish or reddish, in the garment, or in the leather, or in the warp or woof, or in any article made of leather, it is an infestation of leprosy, and shall be shown to the priest. The priest shall examine the mark, and shall quarantine the article with the mark for 7 days. He shall examine the mark on the 7th day. If it has spread in the garment, whether in the warp or the woof, or in the leather, whatever the leather's purpose, the mark is a malignant leprosy. It is unclean. So he shall burn the garment, whether the warp or woof, in wool or linen, or on anything made of leather, in which the mark occurs, for it is a malignant leprosy. It shall be burned in the fire. But if the priest sees that the mark has not spread in the garment, either in the warp or the woof, or on anything made of leather, then the priest shall order that they wash the thing in which the mark occurs, and he shall quarantine it for 7 more days. The priest shall examine the article with the mark after it has been washed, and if the mark has not changed colour, even though the mark has not spread, it is unclean. You shall burn it in the fire. It is a corroding mildew, whether on the top or on the front of it. If the priest looks, and the mark has faded after it is washed, he shall tear it out of the garment, or the leather, or out of the warp or woof. If it still appears in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, or on anything made of leather, it is an outbreak. You shall burn the marked part in the fire. The garment, whether the warp or the woof, or anything made of leather, from which the mildew has departed after washing, shall then be washed a second time, and it will be ceremonially clean. This is the law for a leprous disease in a garment of wool or linen, either in the warp or woof, or on anything made of leather, to pronounce it clean or unclean.